Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Thank you so much, Gertrude, for having me. It's such an honor to be part of Her Story. Every woman has an amazing journey and story, and I'm so happy to share mine. So my name is Malka Shaw, and true fact is Malka is not my legal name. About 2 decades ago, I decided to use my Hebrew name. It's actually my Hebrew name, and I decided to change it to match because it felt more like me than my English name. I am from New York City. I was born in New York City. That's a true story. And I was really raised in the suburbs of New Jersey. And I then lived again in my singles in New York City. And then I moved back out and raised my children. So I grew up in middle-class America, Jewish, Gen X, pretty typical story. I have one brother. Now today I am a wife. I am a mother. I have 3 amazing children who keep me very busy. I am in the middle of teenage life. I have a daughter that's graduating high school, so that is an exciting part of her journey that we will see how her story begins. So based on my Jewish values and the way that I was raised, I always wanted to give back to society. I felt very strongly that the values of tikkun olam, which is a Jewish term of giving back and wanting to help people, these were some of the things I saw in my own parents as they were involved in many different volunteer work, raising money for Israel, and later on in our hometown community actions. So as I was in college, I also explored different versions of volunteerism, learning about different things. And in my early 20s, I entered social work school. I always say I was a little bit idealistic and definitely naive. And I came to being because I really just wanted to help people. Very simple. And I have now been in the field of mental health for over 25 years with a specialty in trauma, relationship dynamics, and women's issues. I used to think that that was separate from my Jewish background, right? So here I am. I've been working in many different capacities, from foster care to prevention of foster care, to working in a psychiatric facility. I was a program director of a psychiatric facility. I worked also in domestic violence in the 1990s when the laws about supporting victims of domestic violence were just coming into shape. And with this background, I also have what I call a unique and unfortunate skill set, meaning you don't want me to have to use it, but it is a skill set of helping people through active, large-scale trauma. And that started when I was there in 9/11. I had actually been spending 2 years in Israel. So I was, for those of you who know your history, I was about a block or about a half a block away from a huge bombing in a pizza shop. And I came home a few weeks later to an even bigger bombing of the World Trade Center. And part of my naivete, a bunch of people were heading down to the Red Cross to see if they could give blood or volunteer. And before I knew it, somebody was pushing me forward saying, hey, I think she finished social work school. And I was being pushed to the forefront. And I spent those weeks working with FEMA and Red Cross. And then after that, when I was working, I would do things in the evening and on the weekends with the organizations. So fast forward, I've had this wonderful balance of having a private practice, private psychotherapy practice, specializing again in trauma, working with couples, working with women, all throughout the journey of womanhood, postpartum, infertility, perimenopause, all the different aspects of dealing with what it's like to be a woman in today's society. And then October 7th happens. And like myself and all Jews around the world, our world had turned upside down, and what had once felt safe and stable no longer felt safe and stable. And in the aftermath, again, just kind of got pushed forward from a WhatsApp group. I was asked to speak on a Zoom, and very quickly there was over 300 people that showed up at the Zoom. We had no idea, and it went from another Zoom to another Zoom, and out of that was born something called Kesher Shalom Projects. So Kesher is the Hebrew word for connections, and that's literally what we're about. We're trying to make connections, and Shalom is literally the word for peace. Kesher Shalom is this initiative that I helped put together because we just really wanted to help people first cope with the aftermath and what is going on with the rise of anti-Semitism and the psychological impact. But then the second piece that kind of was born from it was educating others about Jewish cultural competency, helping people understand the Jewish process. And then the third piece was really understanding how propaganda and indoctrination works, the psychological impact of that, not just on the Jews, but on the people that are indoctrinated and on the society as well. This has been very challenging because it really pushed me to do many skills that were dormant, including public speaking. I started putting together continuing ed classes, and all the while I've been still balancing my private practice and balancing my role as mother. But it's really my role as a mother that's keep pushing it forward, because what I want more than anything is a better future and a better and more peace for my children and all the children, not just the Jewish children, but all children around the world. This is not the world. It's my opinion that we always want to leave the world a better place than we came to it. This is not the world I want to leave for my children. I don't want to leave a world of people that can't come to compromise without critical thinking, without having safe dialogues where people could talk and work out issues. And it's really with that made me really feel that I needed to take this leap forward. The other interesting facts about me is I had my own journey within my own Judaism. And I think before 10/7, I would have put my Jewish self and my therapist self as two separate entities. But in fact, they're not. And one of the other things that's unique about me is I have a very vast and strong Jewish education in all three different kinds: Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. And I had spent a gap year in my life of just really doing a deep dive of understanding religious texts and learning about our culture and our history. And I did that in Israel. And that was really a very big privilege of mine. So that's basically the story about me. I've always been passionate about wanting to help people. I've always been passionate about trying to help people try and understand like how they got to this situation, and they're not powerless. One of the things that I always talk about is about perspective. When we can have our own perspective, that perspective will bring power. Everybody has power within us, and it's my job, whether I'm your individual psychotherapist or you're coming to me for a workshop or I'm doing any kind of consulting or public speaking, it's my job to help you find your own power, your own voice within you. And that comes from often trying to look at things from a different point of view and to get clarity. We can't change what has happened, but we definitely have the power to change how we view it and what the trajectory is moving forward. And that's really my belief, is that while we can't change the past, we can, and we have the power to do what we can. And most people will tell me I'm not so strong. Well, in my over 20 years of working with trauma, betrayal, abuse, sexual assault victims, people have much more inner strength than they are themselves are aware of. And I want to challenge everybody to find their inner strength and know that they have their power within them.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming online and sharing your incredible story with us today. I guess my first question is to address the elephant in the room. Who were you before 10/7 and who are you now after?
It's a great question. And I feel like that's the question that almost all the Jews around the world are asking themselves. So some parts of me are always going to be the same, but I think my focus was much more micro. I was satisfied having a private practice and helping the clients that came to see me individually, dedicated to being as good of a wife and mother to my children as possible. That part's never going to change. But I thought that, you know, the story of Jew hatred, the story of anti-Semitism, I think we all didn't realize exactly how much it was just boiling under the surface. My generation was brought up by grandparents and great-grandparents that told us it could happen again and warned us that it was going to happen again. The next generations, the kids that are in college, maybe were a few steps removed and kind of didn't expect that this was going to happen again. It says in our text that in every generation they will rise against us. But somehow you don't believe it. Somehow you don't believe it. You think, you know, I'm accomplished, I'm educated, I'm living in a democracy. These things can't happen. But the things that we've seen in our eyes, the things I've seen in Australia, the things I've seen in America, it's almost unimaginable to know that these things have happened. So who am I? I am somebody who is not going to be silenced. I am not going to allow somebody to erase my identity. I am not going to allow somebody to redefine my identity and take something that I hold so true and proud and twist it and dehumanize it and make it into something that is ugly and spread non-truths about me and my culture and my people. But I am somebody who cares deeply about all human beings, but feels very connected to my ancestral homeland, feels very connected to all the Jews around the world. And I was telling Gertrude before we went live, one of the most amazing things and one of the silver linings that I've had is really the opportunity to push myself in ways I never thought, like coming on podcasts and meeting people from down under and really meeting some of the most incredible human beings. I was watching Gertrude's TED Talk. You're incredible. Like I'm meeting some of the most incredible human beings. And that's what also plants the seeds for hope. Because we're so focused on the people who hate and so focused on the people who've been silent, but there's so many people who haven't. And Gertrude, just by having me on this podcast, it just shows that you are not afraid to stand up to adversity and to stand up to truth.
Thank you so much for that. Now, how did you come to recognize the gaps in how Jewish trauma is addressed in mental health?
It wasn't addressed. That's the thing. It wasn't addressed. It was sort of just glossed over. Most mental health professionals in America have to take continuing ed classes. And within continuing ed classes, there's different requirements. And one of them is cultural competency. Well, guess what? It was very rare to find, if any, Jewish cultural competency classes. So that is one thing myself and Kesher Shalom has put together is different curriculums. And we've had over 3,000, close to 3,500 therapists come through the classes so far. And in these courses, the way we look at it is it's not just for mental health professionals. They could really be taught at many different levels. But the gaps in Jewish trauma is exactly that. It's not there. It's not even recognized. And we're seeing propaganda spread within the fields of mental health. There's now been conferences held that talk about Zionism as something that's evil. Zionism, can I say is really just the belief that we have an ancestral homeland. It's the belief that we have the right to defend ourselves and have self-determination. It doesn't mean other people cannot live harmoniously in our homeland with us. And people are not aware there are 2 million people who identify as Arabs that are fully Israeli citizens participating in parliament, doctors, lawyers, everything. So it does not mean that. It's just really recognizing our history and that we were the indigenous people of the land and we have a certain pride about that land. And when somebody turns that and calls it something else and equates it with the rest of the things in society that are looked down upon, it's very upsetting. And so that is some of the things that my colleagues are fighting, is just how are we going to kind of rework these curriculums so that propaganda is not spread. But it's being spread in mental health. It's being spread in healthcare, in hospitals, in medical schools. It's really scary because it's really repeating the patterns of history that we've seen in radicals and in not just the Holocaust. It definitely repeats the Holocaust, but when Iran was radicalized, it started with universities and the medical fields as well. So it's very scary because the indoctrination process does start with a very educated, and that I think is a myth that people are not aware of. They think that it's just, oh, they must be ignorant, but they twist the truth, and it's very disheartening. So number one, Jewish trauma was never recognized. Jews were never recognized as minorities, but just statistically speaking, around the world, we're but 0.02% of the entire world, not 2%, 0.02, not so very few percent. In America alone, we're 2.5%, and yet we're not always invited to the table of considered a marginalized population, or so it's a very interesting, I call it the paradox, the duplicitous paradox. There's the punching down and the punching up. Like the Jews are all powerful, but they're not worthy. The Jews have all the money, but yet they're in poverty. So but Jewish people within themselves don't always want to admit that we are a minority. And that's been this kind of like paradox of anti-Semitism. And that is why it's a little bit more complicated than other forms of hate and racism, because it's this kind of duplicity and not even recognizing us as a minority.
So how do personal and collective trauma intersect in your therapeutic approach?
Okay, that's an amazing question. I love that question. So when we're talking about Jewish trauma, I actually don't use the word collective trauma. I use the word communal trauma, because collective trauma is something that we experience maybe post 9/11. It happened to a city. Collective trauma or collaborative trauma is something that happened in COVID when we all were in the lockdown together. Communal trauma is when it's targeted at a specific people or a specific ideology or race color. That's when we call it communal. But everybody's individual background has to come into place, because it's not just Jewish trauma. It's what are we bringing to our story? And everybody has their own individual story. So when I talk about Jewish trauma, I actually divide it into 4 categories. I have our individual trauma. I have our intergenerational trauma, and I could talk about that if you want to, but I really like to look at it, instead of calling it intergenerational trauma, I like to talk about it as intergenerational resilience and strength, because statistically we shouldn't really be around, right? And then we have this thing that I call this push and pull between anti-Semitism of identity destabilization, where they're really trying to manipulate and gaslight our identity, versus this preservation of legacy. Every people has this struggle for preservation of legacy. And then we have the recent current events of post 10/7, and how do all these 4 components play in, and what does that look like for clients, and how do people hold space for this, and how do Jewish clinicians hold space when we're in so much pain ourselves?
Yeah, that's a difficult place to be. So can you describe a transformative moment in your own healing journey?
Oh, I've had so many. But my healing journey for post 7 is the work that I'm doing. So one of the concepts that I always talk about is trauma. Some of these words, these mental health words, always have a negative connotation, right? Like when I say the word anxiety to you or trauma to you, it always seems to have this negative connotation. But trauma and a trauma response is a physiological response in our body when we feel threatened, but it doesn't have to be negative. We can transform our trauma. So the way we do it, especially when you combine therapy values and Jewish values, is in that fight response. Because fight doesn't actually have to mean a physical fight. This is my fight, right? Coming up with these curriculums, writing articles, coming on podcasts, doing the workshops, and really becoming an educator in this area, and really trying to help people understand the perspective. That's my fight, right? So we talk about how we can transform trauma. That's the way. And then that also goes very much in line with the Jewish value called tikkun olam, which is where we feel that it's our obligation to fix the world. We're here to leave the world a better place than we entered it. And that's a very big part of the Jewish philosophy. So everybody has the ability within inside them to transform their trauma and their pain. But the biggest thing that anybody who's human needs is support and validation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when we talk about trauma, we talk about safety, sense of safety, support, and validation. But when we're talking about active ongoing trauma, which is what's happening right now, we can't necessarily guarantee safety, but we can validate and we can support, and it cannot be done alone. Healing happens through relationships and through community.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you always seem to have a focus on the future and the next generation. I think in everything we're all doing in life, we have to think about the generation to come, and are we doing something to make it better than it is now? That's a very, very powerful thing. So what is one myth about therapy that you would like to bust?
Well, therapy is not perfect, right? So and one of the types of therapy I do is something called, I don't know if it's popular in Australia. Have you heard of EMDR, eye movement, rapid desensitization?
Yes.
So people think it's magical. People think I can cure them in 3 or 4 sessions, and that's just simply not true. One of the things is it just gives you that space to take that pain and either look at it from a different perspective,
Right.
or take that and be able to not let it weigh you down. I can't change the past, and I certainly don't have a crystal ball for the future. But what we can do is give you tools and skills so that you can become stronger. When we talk about transforming trauma, trauma doesn't have to lead to despair and depression and an existential crisis and faith. It could really lead to something else. But I would like to clear up this myth of bouncing back, because bouncing back and resilience is one of these biggest myths. When people are like, I want to bounce back, you're not going to be the same once you've gone through something dark. I know you've openly shared about the death of your brother, and I'm sure that was extremely painful. I saw the pictures that you flashed on, and he looks like such a gentle soul. We're never going to be the same, but we have this ability to become stronger. So I used to, and especially when I was working with couples and infidelity, I used to talk about, like, imagine we had this vase, right? Extremely expensive vase that goes, can go for millions of dollars, and your partner smashed it. And all the therapists and doctors, we somehow magically glued it back together, and it can actually still hold water, and it works, but there's the cracks there. You have a choice. Do you want to look at the cracks or notice that it works? But my other friend told me, and her name is Robin Scheineck, she's also part of Kesher Shalom. She told me, and I think this is even more beautiful, in the Japanese culture, they fill those cracks with 24, you've heard this, they fill those cracks with 24 karat gold. And now the vase is worth more. Because so instead of feeling bad or being angry about this happened, we gained this experience, and you have gained strength and power because you've gone through something painful and difficult. And that's why we talk about, like, there's wisdom with age. And as we get older, we have different kinds of wisdom because we've been through things. And we need to celebrate the work and the journey that we've been through that made us stronger and made us more powerful.
Yeah, it makes you who you are. That's where the resilience comes from. So how do you support clients who are navigating trauma rooted in cultural or religious identity?
So first of all, you have to be very humble, because when we talk about religious identity, we have to start the basic philosophy of social work is start where the client is at. So just because somebody says they're Jewish and I'm Jewish doesn't mean that they look at their identity the same way that I look at my identity. Yeah. And there's many different types of Jewish identity. You know, we are one of the most multicultural people that are around. So there's many different, and there's different types of backgrounds. There's different types of religious observance. Some people don't relate to the religion, but they relate to the culture. So like anything else, you want to embrace it with empathy, kindness, but curiosity. Allow the client to tell their story about their culture. Ask them questions. Don't ever assume that you know everything. Mm-hmm. So that's number one, is we need to first, find out who the client is, why things are meaningful for them, and then that will help us understand their source of pain, of why certain things are painful for them. But never make an assumption. Really be humble. We don't know everything. And the longer that I'm a therapist and the older I am and the more I walk this earth, the more I know I don't know everything. It's like, that 16-year-old thing, remember 16-year-olds and 14-year-olds, they know everything, right? Like, but as we get older, we're much more humbled because there's so much to know. So that's number one. And like anything else, we take them through a journey, and it's really important that therapists have different kinds of disciplines that they work through. But one of the most important steps, and I came up with this system called the GUARD system, is gratitude. We want to bring people back to their gratitude, even if they can't see it in the moment. Because what's the opposite of gratitude? Entitlement, bitterness, resentment, darkness. So we want to help them build and see what the good is. Where is their light, even amongst the darkness?
Yeah. That is so true. So let me take you back with my next question. If I could teleport you back into the past to meet that younger woman who went into this field of mental health and trauma healing, if you could go back and give her 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be?
I think that when I was young, I was very insecure. I still think I have to work through my imposter syndromes. But I would tell her all the things that we've been talking about. I would tell her that she's more powerful than she thinks she is. I would help her take away some of these negative messages that were taught to her in childhood about how she's less than or not as worthy, and remind her exactly how capable she was. One of my negatives is that even though I would achieve something, I would look at what I didn't achieve, not necessarily what I did achieve. Maybe that's what pushed me to be a little bit of an overachiever, but that's one nugget of wisdom. The next I would say is sit back and be patient. I definitely didn't have patience in my 20s and 30s. I would say sit back and be patient and just learn. And that every human being has an individual story, and there's something to learn from every individual human being. And that's actually in Ethics of Our Fathers, which is a Jewish source, that every human being has a lesson, and the wise person is who can learn from everybody. So I would tell her to sit back and be patient, and I would tell her to really trust her instincts and not to keep doubting herself.
Absolutely beautiful. Last question is futuristic. You were talking about the next generation. If I could teleport you into the future to meet the 90-year-old you, and she's sitting in her rocking chair, maybe she's on a dance floor surrounded by her children and her grandchildren. If you could go and talk to this wise woman who has led you up until this point, what will you say to her when you finally meet her?
Oh, that is a really good question. Well, hopefully she's surrounded by lots of grandchildren, maybe some great-grandchildren. That would be, every child is a big blessing. But I would ask her if there was anything that she regretted. Is there anything that she could teach me now? I think even looking back in the Middle Ages right now, I see that there was different parts of my past that I had no idea that they were supposed to come together. So I would just ask her, what is it that God wants from me? What does my higher power want from me? How can I serve my higher power? How can I serve God? How can I serve my people? And have I done everything I can to leave the world a better place?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story with us today. It's absolutely inspiring to see such positivity at a time when we need positivity right now. So keep doing the work. Know that you are supported by people all over the world. We do not want history to repeat itself. And unless we talk about these issues, nothing much will change. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. The Her Story Circle is not just a podcast. We are a social impact movement that brings you the stories and voices of women from all over the world. We share these stories to uplift you, to empower you, to energize you, but most importantly, to take you from where you are now to where you're trying to go. So I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody, with yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.